Janis Joplin's Porsche, Wavy Gravy's patchwork jumpsuit, tie-dyed clothes, roach clips, and rock posters. What, props for an Austin Powers movie? No, it's a partial list of arts and crafts items in an exhibit at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. It's called Far Out, Bay Area Design, 1967 to 1973, and it's full of psychedelic hippie objects. Heck, maybe I'll find some of my old roommates there. They've got furniture, they've got clothes, jewelry, 100 craft items, plus dozens of posters, all in the exhibit, which runs through February 20th. Now, there's a serious design heritage to all this. There's the Northern California arts and craft movement, architect Bernard Maybeck, Art Nouveau, American Indian forms, and, oh, they do mention another influence, pharmaceuticals. Now, in those days, baby boomers considered pharmaceuticals something for ingesting. Now they like them for investing. Well, meanwhile, back here in the Plain States, join us in the cool blue TV glow of artifacts, and we'll turn you on to our annual look at the intersection of arts and spirituality. We've got Stephen Edwins, who's going to be talking about religion, art, and architecture. Nat Fuller from the Guthrie talking about A Christmas Carol, celebrating 25 years. Meena Natarajan, she's with Pangea World Theater. And John Kearns. Kearns is the Minister of Music at Spirit Garage. We also have our roving reporter, Gina Filigenzi. She's out asking people what makes them dance. I'll be back with Steve Edwins right after a nice piece of animation by Jason Doherty. Stay tuned. That was a nice piece of animation by Jason Doherty. He was, a piece of his was on a couple months ago, and I really like his work. He's a student at the College of Art and Design. Well, my first guest is Steve Edwins. He's the regional director of the Interfaith Forum on Religion, Art, and Architecture. And it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Nice to be here.
Thanks, Steve. And Steve, you're up from Northfield, which is where your firm is headquartered.
Right.
SMSQ Architects.
That's right.
Can you tell us a little bit about SMSQ and what kind of things you work on?
We were started about 50 years ago.
Well, venerable firm.
By Mr. Ed Suvic.
All right.
Who was a pioneer in new types of church design. And we'll mention some of those things along the way. And I'm president of the firm now, and we specialize in all kinds of church design work. All right. In the region.
Well, and I know that the firm has done other things that I'm probably a little more familiar with.
Sure.
One of my favorite buildings in Northfield is the library there, and you designed that.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't realize that religious architecture was such a mainstay of the firm.
It is. It's always been the real love of the firm, although we do historic preservation work, like I did the TV Sheldon Auditorium in Red Wing.
Oh, very nice.
And we do college campus work as well.
Okay.
And other preservation work.
So multifaceted.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
And your background, did you come to this knowing you wanted to do religious architecture?
Well, somewhere along the way I got interested in church design, I think because I was a person who went to church and I liked to look at church buildings. And I went to St. Olaf College, in part to kind of be influenced by Mr. Suvic, and then went on to architecture school, and then taught for a while, and then came back to Minnesota to work on churches.
Right. Where had you been out of the state?
I went to Yale University for architecture school, and then I taught at the University of Kentucky for about 5 years.
Oh, all right. So you've had that perspective as well.
Worked in Appalachia, which was a good education too, besides other places.
Oh, I imagine. Did you work in some religious
Actually, I worked
buildings
on low-income housing issues.
Oh, all right.
In the mountains,
so you brought that. And why did you come back to Northfield?
Well, I came back because I just thought this would be the right environment to work on church design work.
Okay.
Right. And Mr. Silvic asked me to join the firm 23 years ago, and I did.
Well, that's great. And had it always been in Northfield?
Yes.
It originated right there. Right. One of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show was to talk about that intersection between architecture per se, which is your field, and sort of the spiritual realm, which obviously for many people they relate to that in a structure of some sort, a synagogue, a church, or whatever. Can we talk a little bit about some of the sort of historical influences on architecture as people wanted to build something to come in and worship or gather, have communion, whatever?
Well, architecture's always been, first of all, a shelter for people to get out of the weather and have a place to do religious activities. And obviously, over the years, people realized that there were symbolic roles that architecture and the arts play to represent their faith and to help them with their spiritual ceremonies or thinking. So both the space and the use of arts have been integrated, I think, from time immemorial in religious places.
Right.
Frequently, art forms were used to teach people, like Bible stories and things of that sort.
Certainly at a
before
time when they
people
weren't
read.
reading about
That's right.
it.
And early stained glass windows were kind of teaching devices as well as things of wonder.
Right.
And the arts have always been so close to spiritual experiences because they deal with things that aren't quite explainable, things that are awesome, things that are mysterious.
Right.
And so art and architecture have played that role, I think, in spiritual lives of people forever.
Well, as you mentioned that, I'm realizing that as I go into a space like you're describing, there are a number of things that hit the senses. I mean, there's listening to what's being said,
Right.
and in some cases smelling what's being sent around the room, incense or whatever.
Exactly.
And it's a wonderful kind of theatrical space. But it also is a place where the eye can be caught by, as you say, the windows, often the Stations of the Cross might be, and for certain kinds of religious organizations, might be up there to depict part of the story.
Exactly.
And as a young man, I'm guessing that you were in there probably looking around a lot.
Yeah,
looking at the space.
I liked the big spaces, and I liked organ music.
Yeah. Oh, and the music, of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
Because they're instruments for sound as well,
Yeah.
these kind of spaces. So actually, church design is one of those few places today where you're dealing with the integration of the arts because you're involved in all of those art forms and thinking about how they're going to work in the space.
Yeah.
Stained glass windows, perhaps, the visual arts, dance even, music,
Yes, I've seen dance. In
performance
Yeah.
roles, plus people assembling and doing religious ceremonies or rituals. And that's usually what guides the design of a space, needs to be what people are doing in the space itself. And that's kind of one of the new trends, I think, is design is more based now on trying to respond to the way people worship together than picking a historic style and saying, well, we're going to do a neo-Gothic or we're going to do a neoclassical church,
So
because that's religious.
Right, so instead of building the shell, which might be gorgeous, and then telling the congregation, oh, come in here and fit your activity together to
That's
it,
right.
you're building it more from the inside out, as it sounds.
Right, and that's been both an influence, I think, from modernism in architecture.
Okay, from the architectural field.
In other words, yeah, you try to serve the program, that architecture is a tool for helping people do their work.
Right.
And it also is influenced by people going back during the 30s and 40s and 50s. And Mr. Sovik's work, for instance, and other architects in this area were very, very key in this movement of going back to the early church and saying, well, how do people really worship in the early days, before Gothic times, before? And what can we learn from that, and what can we learn from modern theology for?
And I'm guessing in those earliest times, Steve, the places of worship weren't necessarily so grand. And,
Correct.
And again, we're talking mostly from a European perspective here. Was it the Goths, or the Gothic architects that made it grand, made it huge, and of the scale that we identify?
I mean, the church started out being in homes. So,
All right.
and when the churches were, at least in the Christian church, and that there was a time when it was kind of secret, and people, were
Well,
in
there's
people's
persecution.
homes.
Yeah.
When it became public, they needed bigger meeting halls, and they adopted the Roman public meeting hall rather than a temple, interesting enough,
Well, that is interesting.
which was the basilica. And then the basilica kind of turned into the Gothic cathedral. And as those got bigger and longer, they tended to become what we call bus churches, where you're lined up in rows
Right.
facing one end.
Okay.
And that's what's changing now, is that the church design is going back to more of a family style of seating, where people are gathered around worship and sacrament rather than being an audience watching a performance.
It's kind of the
without end of
auditorium
room.
style.
Right.
Less of that.
There's still a lot of tension between that. The churches tend to fall into two categories these days. They're kind of more sacramental oriented and family style, or they're more like auditoriums.
And then someone like myself, I would be conflicted, because part of why I go to a fantastic structure like that is to be awed.
Correct.
I love going into the classic structures. But on the other hand, the interaction, the human interaction you're describing, is also something that I enjoy.
Right. And that's kind of the change that's happening. And it's kind of a big mission for artists and architects right now to figure out ways of using new art forms to support this new mode of worship, so that the spaces are beautiful and so they are inspiring.
Well, and you said something that I wasn't quite aware of, but very in the contemporaneous mode, there's an ecumenism that's happening in religious architecture.
Well, very much so.
Blurring
Yeah.
some. lines.
A lot of the denominations can kind of see similarities in the other denominations, and spaces are becoming quite similar for different faiths. And that's irritating maybe to some denominations that, we want to have our identity clear.
Hang on to
but
that.
the identity is usually defined more and more by the way they worship than necessarily the style of the building. It used to be that you could kind of see in Minnesota down the road that a Catholic church would be kind of like a neo-Renaissance building. And Presbyterians and Lutherans would tend to use neo-Gothic churches.
Interesting.
And that's fallen apart in a way.
Right.
And at the same time, the way people worship in different denominations across the world is coming together. People are emphasizing baptism much more than they ever did. And we recently had a conference just emphasizing learning about baptism for architects.
And this is across sectarian lines.
Yes.
Fascinating. Well, let's talk a little bit about the Interfaith Forum.
Right.
Now, this is a special interest group of the National AIA?
Correct. The American Institute of Architects, which is the professional organization of architects nationally, which has about 60,000 members. And one of the interest groups for members is called IFRA, or the Interfaith Forum on Religion, Art, and Architecture. And those names were purposely chosen because it's an attempt to have a collaborative gathering of people who work on church design, rather than just being architects.
And this comes out of the National AIA.
Correct.
And of course, there's a very active Minnesota branch of this.
Right. In fact, the history of the group is quite interesting because there used to be arts and crafts kind of guilds for churches and people who were consultants working with churches in the arts. And they all kind of merged together years ago to become IFRA. And now that's part of the AIA nationally as an organization to carry it out.
Okay, so it found a home, as it were,
within
with
the AIA.
Right.
Right.
Interesting.
Now, we've started a local chapter affiliated with that's part of AIA Minnesota, which will be the Religious Architecture Committee of
the Minnesota,
Minnesota. Right.
AIA.
And over the last 3 years, we've run some big conferences to help people understand these phenomena. We're both architects and artists, et cetera.
And you head this up. You chair one of these?
Sort of. I'm on the steering committee.
Steering committee.
I'm on the national organization as a regional director,
Okay.
and then just part of a steering committee of architects and consultants who are helping plan our local events.
Well, and given the intersection of these different fields, art per se, architecture, you told me earlier that one need not be necessarily an architect to be part of this interest group.
Exactly. The idea is for liturgical consultants and stained glass people and organ builders and visual artists to be part of the group, as well as clergy or administrators who are interested in architecture.
So it sounds like a great meeting place.
That's what our hope is, yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, Steve, we have just a minute left or so. I want to ask you if there's a phone number people can call if they want to find out more about either your firm or the forum.
Well, the local committee that will be running conference, et cetera, can be reached through AI Minnesota. And I've written down the number here.
Okay, good.
It's 612-338-7981.
Why don't you read that one more time? That's the local number.
Local number is 612-338-7981.
Okay, good.
And I could be reached at SMSQ at 1-800-388-1682.
Okay, and that's in Northfield.
Right. And we do have some extra copies of an older version of Faith and Form, which is the magazine of IFRA. This happens to be a continuing education issue that I'm showing because it has a lot of articles on all these aspects of integrating the arts in worship spaces.
So they could give you a call.
Yeah, and I've got lots of extra copies of these, so I could give these away.
Thanks.
Okay.
Steve, nice to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Sharing all that. That's great.
Bye.
Well, we'll go to our monthly news bits in a moment, but that'll happen right after Gina Filigenzi goes out and asks some people, what makes you dance?
Oh, thanks, Phil. I'm at the University of Minnesota at the Barbara Barker Center for Dance. And as soon as I get done stretching here, we're going to go in to a dance studio and ask some of the students why they dance. Why do you dance?
Why do I dance? I hardly know anymore because I've been dancing for 34 years and almost all of that professionally. But, gosh, it's just sort of a way of life. It's sort of a way of finding physicality mixed with spirituality, mixed with intimacy, mixed with expression, creativity. It's just kind of a way of being.
Why do you dance?
When I was 3 years old, I saw my sister dancing in a class, and that's how I got interested in it, because I would be dancing in the corner along with the classes, and that's how I joined when I was 3, and I've just been doing it my whole life, and it's pretty much a family thing.
I guess I don't feel like I have any other choice. I do it because I have to.
Well, I've been dancing since I've been really young, and I really enjoy it. I've always loved doing it, and I wanted to continue it.
I dance because it's a nonverbal form of expression.
I've actually had to not dance for a while before, and it's really hard not to. So I just can't imagine not dancing. It's just, you get really depressed when you don't dance, and so it's just what you do.
It's probably for the same reason somebody else goes to church, or for the same reason they go to the North Woods. It helps me feel connected with something greater than myself. But it's through myself, it's through my body that I have a larger sense of meaning and connectedness.
Well, when I was 3 years old, my parents took me to the ballet, and it was probably one of the best things that I'd ever been to. And when I was 3, I said, "Mom, I want to dance." I've been dancing ever since. It's a high, it's a rush.
I saw my older cousin dancing when I was really small, around 3 years old, and I thought to myself, that's what I want to do. It looked like so much fun, and I guess I've been dancing ever since then, and I found that when I don't dance, I'm just not happy, so I guess I pretty much have to dance.
Well, I guess because my parents tell me to do what I wanted to do in life and what I enjoyed doing in life. So I just wanted to dance, and that's why I'm here, just to learn more.
Wow, those answers were enlightening. It's obvious that dance means many different things to different people on various levels. It's not just moving your body to the music. It's beautiful. That's food for thought. See you next time.
And for December 1999, here is our monthly arts news bits. The creative responsibility of artists was the topic last month in Sevilla, Spain. The event was called El Encuentro de Creadores, and 1,000 Spanish and Latin American artists showed up to raise consciousness on the role of the arts in modern society. Quality of life issues were much in the minds of U.S. voters in last month's elections. A study of election trends by the American Institute of Architects indicates that historic preservation, school crowding, approval of development projects, urban growth limits, and similar initiatives claim strong voter interest. And closer to home, Art Town Online will go offline on New Year's Day. The Metropolitan Regional Arts Council maintained the database for a number of years. More than 300 nonprofit arts groups located in the 7-county metropolitan area were on the list. MRAC worked with MN Online, that's the Service of Minnesota Regional Network, to provide the information. The fact that numerous arts organizations now have their own websites is given as the reason for dropping the service. And that is the Artifacts News Bits for December 1999. I'll be back with Nat Fuller from the Guthrie right after this art quote from Willa Cather. Well, that was just a little quote from Willa Cather, one of our art quotes on Artifacts. You are watching Artifacts, and I'm Phill Lindsay. My next guest is an actor at the Guthrie Theater. Nathaniel Fuller has had many roles there, and the Guthrie is celebrating 25 years of a Christmas Carol. Nat, it's nice to have you on the show.
It's great to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
25 years of a Christmas Carol, but in your case, you've been at the Guthrie a good 13 years.
I think this is my 13th season.
That's right.
I calculated I've done 12 Christmas carols. I was not cast in one year, and but I was understudying Scrooge, and I had to go on that year, so I was able to count that as
Oh,
a
so you
year
stepped on as Scrooge.
I stepped on.
Wow. And how many directors have you had in that number of years?
Actually, only 3.
All right.
I think in that time, because Richard Ohms directed it for a number of years, and then Sari Ketter has directed it for a number of years, and 1 year Risa Brainin directed it.
Okay. And Sari's directing again this
Sari
year.
is directing it again this year.
Okay, now for folks who are not actors, haven't spent any time on the boards, even though someone's directed a show for a number of years, does it change from year to year?
Yes. All the time that I've been doing the show, all of the directors have made it a challenge to find something new from year to year. The basic structure of the show may stay the same. We'll make minor changes in the scripts. And traditionally, new lines will be added by someone's creative inspiration. I think there's one line that Bruce Bonney added years ago in the old version of Christmas Carol, and we can explain later that there are two versions of the show that the Guthrie has done over the years. But Bruce added a line about yes and no, saying at the end of the show, I know the answer to yes and no. This had to be 10 years ago, and that line has remained from version to version.
And he did that as an actor.
He did that as an actor. Came up with it spontaneously one time. The director liked it, said, that's great, we'll keep it. And now it's become part of the tradition.
What happens to an actor, though, if he or she comes up with the line, feels right, says it, and the director doesn't like it?
Then it gets cut.
It gets cut.
Yeah.
Plain and simple.
From my point of view, if I chose to keep that line against the director's interests, then I would question whether my paycheck would be coming the next week or the next show.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
If it's really a firm thing, it can vary from theater to theater. It depends on who's in charge, and whoever is in charge has the final say. And in this case, it'd be the director.
Point taken. All right. Let's go back to Dickens. I don't know a lot about Dickens, the author. You were sharing a little bit about your thoughts, at least your impressions of the piece that he wrote, and you have some fairly strong feelings about the quality of this work.
Well, Dickens, I think, wrote, and I'd like to preface a lot of this by saying it's my opinion. I think that Christmas Carol is a great work of art, and with any great work of art, it will mean something different to everybody. But it is known that Dickens was struggling a bit financially at the time, and because of his history of being brought up in poverty, his father went to debtor's prison, he was sent away to school, and then taken out of school and put to work as a very young boy. He had a great fear about financial insecurity. So as he was trying to write this show, he was write this story, it was not a play, but he was under financial pressure, and he was scared about it. And I think as he began to write it, it became a show about himself. And Dickens, I think, really put himself mentally and psychologically in the position of Scrooge and saw himself as Scrooge. And there are stories of him. He always wrote standing up, and he would run around the room and say the lines out loud. And he wrote about how he would burst into tears as he was writing the story, or he would stop writing and at night walk around the city inspired by the story and living the story and talking about it. And he wrote it in a relatively short time. I forget how long it was, but it was a matter of weeks that he was able to dash off the story because he felt it just flowed out of him.
So he's lucky if he was thinking of getting paid for it as well, but it also just flowed out of his own experiences.
Oh, yes, it absolutely captivated
I'm interested, you say that he may be identified with Scrooge. In other words, was he penurious himself?
He was, I think to some degree, in his biography, there's a lot of information that he was always worried about money. His family got large, and he was worried about the number of additional mouths to feed, and it was always a concern for him. And I think he wrote this story as a lesson to himself.
Oh, interesting.
And to become more expansive himself.
Well, and you and I were talking before the camera's rolling here about the whole notion of giving and receiving, sharing, and I'll have to say, sharing to me is sort of the bottom line in this story, but there's something about what he was saying in terms of giving of oneself and doing it.
Absolutely. I think that for me, the story is about what it means to be alive. And I think most everyone watching this program probably knows the story of Scrooge and his visits by the three spirits and how he's taken through his past and into the present and into the future. And every aspect of his experiences is related to some specific aspect of his life, I think. And he's shut down in a shell. And the reason he's shut down is because he doesn't share. He wants to live by himself. He wants to have nothing to do with anybody else except make money off them.
And feels fairly righteous in doing so.
Absolutely.
He doesn't feel guilty for that at all.
He feels that it's the proper way to live. He doesn't realize to what degree he's insulating himself from pain because he's forgotten his pain. It's all buried, and I think it has a lot of modern psychological implications. So what these spirits do is they peel away each layer of his personality and his life experience, and he's forced to look at it, and it's very, very painful. But what he realizes at the end is that if he doesn't bury that, if he leaves it all open, and he shares himself, most of all. Yes, he shares his money, and he shares society, but he gives of himself. He's alive. Yeah. If you don't share of yourself, you're not alive. We're creatures who are meant to live in contact with other people, and with nature, and with the world. And so when you're able to give of yourself, you feel alive. And equally important, if you're able to receive with joy. One of the really important parts of the show, of the story, I keep wanting to differentiate between the play and the novel. At the Guthrie, we're doing the play, and Dickens wrote a novel. And let's just forget that. If I say the show or the play, it's the same story.
Sure.
But one of the important parts of this story is that Fred wants him to come to dinner at his house. He wants to host Scrooge, and Scrooge refuses to do that. And a big moment in the story is toward the end when he accepts Fred's invitation to go and play games and to be treated as a guest. Yeah. And the receiving is just as important as the giving.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's called A Christmas Carol, but it is not full of a lot of Christian references in particular.
No, and I found that very interesting. There is maybe one or two references to Christ himself. One speaks of he for whom this season is named. I think Dickens wanted, and yet it's a very spiritual show. It's filled with the spirits of Christmas, past, present. It has a lot of pagan images, the Christmas tree, the mistletoe, the punch, the dancing, the midwinter celebrations, which are based on pagan rituals. I think what Dickens wanted.
Yes. Writing in a Scrooge,
yes.
perhaps.
What Dickens wanted was for this story to extend through all religions and all beliefs. I think he felt that the spirit of sharing and giving and generosity should be universal, regardless of what your religion is. For him, the time was Christmas, the place was Christmas, but I think he wanted to go beyond that.
I almost got, as a young person first encountering the story, both as written and then in production, that almost, and I'm sure in the time that he wrote it, irony probably wasn't a mental conceit per se, but he was admonishing people. He said, you know, we've got to pay more attention to those without, and as you were saying, those who can also give. And I always took A Christmas Carol as a bit of a moralistic title, as it were. Something like that.
There is I think there is a lot of irony in Dickens' writing, of course. And there is obviously a moralistic orientation toward the message in the show. But what I find interesting is that nowhere does he suggest that the government policy should be changed. It's an individual moral issue. I think he wanted, I think he saw himself as Scrooge. I think he wanted us, when seeing the story, to say, my golly, that's me. And when I played Scrooge, and for several years I did play Scrooge at the Guthrie, I always hoped that I could be human enough that people would see themselves in his argument. And Scrooge is not, for his time, he was not that far out of the ordinary. And I think it's a mistake to say, well, look at that Scrooge. Boy, he's exceptionally mean
way
and stingy, and he's way over there, and we're way over here. No, I think we can all find a little bit of ourselves in Scrooge and make that individual decision. I think Dickens felt if we could make that individual decision and enough people within themselves could find that joy and generosity, we wouldn't need government policy. I mean, he mentions the poorhouse and the treadmill and the institutions that exist, but nowhere does he campaign for some sort of action within government. It's all personal.
Make it on your own.
Yes.
Do it. Work together. Share.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nat Fuller, thank you for being on. The play runs through the 26th.
26th of December.
At the Guthrie, 25th anniversary, and look for Nathaniel Fuller on stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And of course, you can call the Guthrie box office. We'll get that number up, perhaps, box office, if you want to find out about tickets on that. Now, later on our show, we're going to have John Kearns, the musician, in our live performance segment. Next up, Meena Natarajan. She'll be on with me right after we see a wonderful animation by Doug Pfeifer. It's called Jack. It was part of the Electronic Theater 10, which was held last month. It's very cool. Stay tuned. Well, I want to thank the animator, the artist there, Douglas Pfeifer, and also a big thanks to Rebecca Bryden from the Minneapolis Office of Film, Video, and Recording, who helped us get that piece. She went the extra mile. My next guest is Meena Natarajan. She's a playwright, and she works with Pangea World Theater, and it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
And we were actually getting going just before we got the cameras rolling here, talking about your projects and Pangea's projects, and the fact of spirituality is something that informs your work. Why don't we just start with that?
Sure. I just want to talk a little bit about Pangea World Theater and why we started Pangea, because that kind of is also, includes the question of spirituality and the way Pangea approaches the work.
Okay, so part of Pangea's goal is to sort of bring some of this in? Is that what you're
absolutely.
saying? Okay.
And I just want to say a little bit about Pangea itself.
Help yourself.
The word pan means universal, and Gaia is the Greek goddess of the earth.
Sure.
So Pangea actually refers to that supercontinent before continental drift happened, when the whole world was one. And so we take that very seriously. We want Pangea to be a space in which people from different ethnicities and backgrounds can come together, not only from this country, but all over the world, and work together inclusively. And at the same time, it's not, completely cognizant of the political, racial, ethnic division, and completely conscious of the power structures in this country. We still dream of a place where we can include everybody and work together. So part of our approach to Pangea is spirituality, and people can bring whatever they want. We want to celebrate them for whoever they are, whatever they happen to be. And so, that forms the impulse of the work that we do.
And is manifest in the shows that you run. I mean, you have quite the eclectic repertoire that you've put on.
Oh, absolutely. We don't want to kind of like be defined as that we have this style of work or that style of work. In fact, we'd like to have a huge range of styles and bring the approach of respect and spirituality into the work itself.
Okay.
And I hope that's seen in the shows that we do.
Well, I have. In the shows of yours that I have seen, I've seen that even though they might be very different shows. I was just mentioning that I saw Ajax, which is a classic Greek piece of drama that's rarely produced.
Absolutely.
But I found it in there as well.
Yeah.
So I say thanks for giving those of us that came to see the show the opportunity to see that particular play and get some of these messages from it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the production of Ajax that we did was full of ritual. It was full of
very much.
It was full of it was full of it was full of spirituality in a sense, in the way the actors changed their characters on stage, in the movements that they developed, and part of the way we develop our work is through ensemble, through everybody contributes and everybody's contribution is valued and respected.
Yes, I sat in afterwards. That was one of the performances in which the company came out and talked. You were there and the actors and other folks. And they made that point. The actors, I think, particularly appreciate that. How does that come back to you as a playwright, someone that works with the text? At a certain point, you have to give up a little bit there, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. It's always difficult giving up.
Yeah.
This is like your baby, and it's and you're jealously. Actually, as a playwright, you tend to jealously watch every word that everybody's saying.
Every word.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if somebody misses a word, it's just this moment where you're literally jumping and tearing your hair off. But I think that you have to let go at a certain point.
Yeah, there's a certain spontaneity that the actors provide.
Oh, absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely. And that actually, I mean, it's also wonderful in another sense to see the work come alive like that with movement and with, when you're writing words on a page, you simply don't dream of the movement that's possible.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't explore that either. But the work that we do is so movement oriented, so it's wonderful to see a piece of work come alive with movement.
Oh, and when you say that, I mean the physical stagecraft in Ajax, for instance, with those long staves and things.
Yes.
And I believe that was in 6A over at Hennepin Center.
That's
for the
right.
Arts. There were some near misses there. At least the night I was there, but you knew it was in control. I mean, they had done their work.
Absolutely.
Pretty impressive stuff.
Absolutely.
Now, your background, you're a playwright.
I'm a playwright.
How did you come to playwriting? What brought you as a person into doing that?
Well, I have written plays in India also, and I also come from a background of performance and street theater actually.
Oh.
So we had a group of people in India, and we would create street theater pieces together. So in a sense, I've been a creator and performed also. So I've always loved the art of word making, in a sense, putting things together and really crafting a page out and then seeing it come out in dialogue and in the form of a play. And actually, I did biology for a very long time.
The science?
The science.
All right.
Right. And I was a biologist, and I actually almost finished my PhD in biology. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I went back to playwriting. It was one of those moments where I just felt I couldn't do I couldn't do biology anymore. I just really had to write.
Enough with the petri dishes.
Absolutely.
Let's go to the written word.
Absolutely. And I just had to. And it was like, what Joseph Campbell calls following your bliss. I just really had to follow my bliss. And I've never looked back. I've never been happier about my life and how it turned out.
And Pangea gives you one outlet for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Now, I'm guessing that you do projects that are not immediately for Pangea.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. In fact, one of the first projects that I wrote, and that's to do with art and spirituality, for Pangea was Conference of the Birds.
I remember.
Did you see Conference?
Yes.
And this is about a group of birds that travels together to find their king, and they're going along, and there are these incredible difficulties along the way, and the hoopoe, who's the leader of the birds, kind of, wants them to, is trying to push them along to find their king. And after these crossing 7 valleys and 7 deserts, they finally reach their goal and find out that the king is themselves all along. And for me, writing that play was very much a journey into playwriting. Again, I mean, that was the first play, full-length play that I wrote after a long time. And so it was so epiphanic, actually. I finished the play and I said, I just cannot do anything but this.
Yeah, and then,
this is my life.
And it was at that point that biology
took a backseat completely.
Did you have a specialty in biology?
Yes, ecology and conservation. And that's another aspect of my work. Oh, yes.
This ties in with you as a person, then.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in the sense that I think that, the Gaia theory, if you've ever heard of that, about the Earth as a superorganism, and how
that there's a
everybody
life force
is connected
to the
Earth itself.
Planet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And not only that, but everybody in the planet is connected, and everything and every person in the planet is connected. Yeah. And I think that really informs not only my personal work and how I approach my work as a playwright, and how I give it up to the actors, but also in how Pangea itself is approached.
I suppose that every theater company has the ability to look around the world and find works that they might want to produce and perform. But it seems to me that Pangea is maybe not uniquely, but close to uniquely positioned to look at the world literature. And as you survey the plays and the work that's out there in various cultures, various parts of the globe, the Pangea, do you sense a difference or a similarity in the messages, in the content of the plays that you discover? Not the ones you're writing, but the ones that you're seeing that people are creating themselves in the different parts of this planet. Is there a commonality to what they have to say?
I think so. I mean, I think you go through, it's just because of what informs the work. The world is not so small, and I mean, it's not so large anymore. It's really small, and it's getting smaller. And sometimes the work that I see out in the work that I read about or see in other countries, and about how they're interpreting the world that they live in, I honestly believe we cannot ignore what's happening out there in the world. And people are reflecting that in the work that they're doing.
Do you think the role of the art in this particular case, theater, is going to make a difference? I know it does to you.
Oh, absolutely.
To the general audiences, to the broader public?
Well, I couldn't do this if I didn't think my work was making a difference out in the general audience.
Because I know part of Pangea's, and I'm obviously with yourself, is to make statements against the divisiveness that's prevalent in the world.
Absolutely.
But at the same time celebrate the differences amongst us.
Yes. What also drives me is the fact that I grew up in a country that is completely diverse. I mean, the languages, religions, Islam and Hinduism and Jews and Christians and a host of others, Buddhists and Jains. So living side by side, and I remember that India. And for me, it's with a great sense of sadness that I go back to India and I see the divide now that exists.
Do you feel that it's getting worse?
Yes, in some senses, yes. It's different in different parts of the country.
Sure.
But I do think, there are lots of people doing wonderful things about bringing groups together. But it's sad for me to see the differences, and I think this is happening all over the world.
I see it here.
Yeah, and here also.
We're going into enclaves of identity.
Yes.
And people are working not so much to build community, but to safeguard their own islands of reality.
Absolutely, and there's like a complete fragmentation of realities in a sense. So I really believe that we are really working to bring people together in that sense, and that's why I believe the work we are doing is so unique and so important and so vital to.
Meena, we just have a couple moments left, but I want to make sure that we mention any upcoming projects here. I mean, it's the beginning of the winter of the year 2000.
That's right.
What are you working on? What's Pangea working on?
Right now we have a show going on. We've invited a Nigerian writer and director. It's called Not in My Season of Songs.
Okay, well now that would have been in November.
It's in November. It's going.
Yeah, but this show is running in December.
No, this show is running in November.
No, the show you're on right now is running in December. This television show is a December program, so you just completed that show.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
And right now, Lou and I, Lou Pham is the other person in Pangea, are working on Rashomon, which is
Very
Japanese.
exciting.
That's right. It's a Japanese folktale, and we're going to the original. We're going back to the source stories. Rashomon was a movie by Akira Kurosawa, the Japanese film director.
Yeah.
And what we're doing is going back to the source stories and writing our own adaptation of Rashomon. So, and that's going to play in February.
Okay, do you know where that'll
March. It'll be at the Little Theatre in Hennepin Center for the
downtown.
Arts.
Now, if people want to get hold of Pangea Theater, there are two ways they can do it, of course. There's a phone number they can call, and could you tell us what that number is?
Sure, that's 612-377-1728.
Okay, so that's the number. But there's also now, of course, the inimitable webpage for
right.
Pangea, and would you rattle that off for us?
Sure, it's www.pangeaworldtheatre.org.
Okay, we'll have that on the screen. Meena, a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much.
Continued good luck with Pangea and all your work.
Thanks so much.
That's good. Well, next up, musician John Kearns. He's the Minister of Music at Spirit Garage in South Minneapolis. He'll be performing an original composition. Stay with us.
This is Waiting for the Sun. Sound man is a pretty cool thing, but he knows he's never supposed to sing. His is not to question why, his is but to do and die. Well, there's a little bit of John the Baptist in all of us. There's a little bit of John the Baptist in all of us. Well, these people on the TV screen, they're using too much publicity. It's not my job to be famous here. I am just the messenger. Well, there's a little bit of John the Baptist in all of us. There's a little bit of John the Baptist in all of us, waiting for the sun to come again someday, waiting for the sun to rise again today, waiting for the sun to shine and warm my face, waiting for the sun to take me home. I pray, I pray. Got a hidden agenda for the rest of my life. It's our job to point to Jesus Christ. It's our job to point to Jesus Christ. So there's a little bit of John the Baptist in all of us. There's a little bit of John the Baptist in all of us, waiting for the sun to shine again someday, waiting for the sun to take me home, I pray, waiting for the sun to shine and warm my face, waiting for the sun to take me home, I pray, I pray. I am just the messenger.
Very nice. Kearnsy, well done.
Thanks. Thank you.
Now, Kearnsy, you have one of the greatest job titles that I can think of. You are the Minister of Music at Spirit Garage.
Technically, yes.
Now, what does that mean? What do you do there?
I was hired by Spirit Garage to form a band, write music, perform music, and basically lead worship at church every Sunday.
And this was one of your songs?
Yep.
How long ago did you write that?
About 2 years ago I wrote it, when the Spirit Garage first started.
Yeah.
One of the first songs I wrote, and just inspired by Scripture.
What is Spirit Garage? What church does it come out of, and where do you folks meet?
Spirit Garage was sponsored by Bethlehem Lutheran on 41st and Lindale.
Okay. South Minneapolis?
Yep, in South Minneapolis. They decided they needed a mission. They wanted to have a mission in Uptown. Although we're funded mostly by Bethlehem, we're not affiliated with the Lutheran Church. We're an interdenominational church.
Right. And you folks meet somewhere else, though?
Yes, we worship at Jefferson Elementary on 26th and Hennepin in Uptown.
And I remember seeing you with your band over at Lake Harriet for one of those Sunday services. I guess they put on a variety of churches and religious organizations are there.
Yeah, all the churches in South Minneapolis get together, all the different doctrines and such, organized together to divide up the Sundays, and Spirit Garage is one of those
Very
Sundays.
Cool.
Yeah.
And you're involved with music other projects beyond Spirit Garage. What else do you do?
I work for, actually I've got several projects going on. The Spirit Garage is my full-time job. I work as a guitarist in a band called Mr. Hooper. We've been together for about 5 years. And I play bass for a man named Scott Laurent, local singer-songwriter here in Minneapolis.
It's quite a repertoire. You got to have all that together.
Yeah, that is true. A lot of songs.
If people wanted to find out more about the Ministry of Music, Spirit Garage, there's both a phone number and a website they could get to?
Yeah, the website is www.spiritgarage.org.
Okay.
And our office phone is 612-827-1074.
It's that 612 I keep forgetting, so thanks. Kearnsy, pleasure to have you on.
Hey, thank you.
Enjoyed the music.
Thanks
very,
a lot.
very nice.
Thanks again.
And I'll be back to wrap and chat at the end of the show right after this interesting art fact. Rather impressive for the Minnesota fact in there. I thought that was interesting to know. At this point in the show, I usually talk with you about a few things that are coming up. Forecast Public Art Affairs has a nice series going on called Meet the Artist. It's a series over at the University of Minnesota. It's being held in Blagan Hall, and it's free and open to the public. I just wanted to mention one of their events. It's Thursday, December 9th. David Hall, Allison Heimstead, Allison Kerwin, and Sherry Flagg. It's a group that recently presented a mythological pyrotechnic performance event in Fair Oaks Park over in South Minneapolis. That was in September that the event was, but they're going to be talking about that Thursday, December 9th. There's another group that same night called Chicks on Sticks, performance artists Amy Ballested and Shelley Chenander, and it involves still walking teenagers. We need more of that. And then Vivian Morgan and Sandy Call are also some artists that are all part of this event Thursday, December 9th. Starts at 6 p.m., Blagan Hall, University of Minnesota from Forecast. Great event. Now, by the way, this next one, this is a Phill pick. Very cool. Also at the university, Sanford Moore's University Gospel Choir. They're going to be in concert Sunday, December 12th. It's at Ferguson Recital Hall. That's the University West Bank campus. Concert's at 4 p.m. Sanford Moore's University Gospel Choir. Cool. I've been to some of theirs. Don't miss that one. And there's a new media partner out here called the Art Temple. Actually, it's a community of writers and performers. They kind of grew out of the open mic spoken word community. And they've developed a program that includes a television show, and I thought I'd mention it to Artifacts viewers. It's Saturday nights, 9 p.m. on Minneapolis Cable Channel 33. Hosts Dave Okar and Neil Levy. They interview artists who read their poetry, perform music, and talk about their art. So that's a new thing from the Art Temple. Well, next month, one of my guests will be Esther Grandbois. She's very excited. She's got her new space open in South Minneapolis, and we'll be talking with her and other representatives of the hot art scene here in Minneapolis. Now, we do have our hotline here for Artifacts. It's 612-673-2234. So if you've seen any guests or you want to learn a little bit more about the organizations that they're part of, give us a call. We can connect you to them. Also, grab your pencils and Crayolas because we have our monthly calendar of events at the end of the show. And this month, because it's December, we're rolling all the guests we've had on Artifacts for the entire year. I'm Phill Lindsay. We'll see you next time on Artifacts.